That is it. And the funny thing is, my father passed in 2018. And so I spent an inordinate amount of time and energy wanting to be better than my father. So what I was doing was only seeing most of the negative stuff and not taking a minute to say, you know what? He's your tree. There's some good stuff in you. It
Right.
had to come from somewhere. Let's focus on some of those good things you got. And in fact, one of the best things he ever said to me was, if there's something I did that works for you, keep it. And if there are things that I did that don't, throw them out. And I used to think like, dude, that is the most cowardly thing in the world to say. Why don't you just be better? And then when I thought about it, I was like, well,
It's
no,
true.
no, there's some value to that. So, but yeah, the all of the stuff comes from loving a child. And the irony of it is that I wasn't doing any of it for myself. And it took that same child to tell me one day that I needed to do more, which was like, what did you say to me? They said, Dad, you need to do more.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're going to be discussing parenting and education from a parent's perspective, and we're joined by Nate Turner. Nate, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. The privilege is ours. Now, let's learn a little bit about you, Nate. Who is Nate Turner?
It depends on who you ask. So I find that word "who" is really important. It's certainly a very important word to me. So if it's okay, I'm gonna spend just a little bit of time talking about the word "who."
Yeah.
I think there's a word we don't spend enough time analyzing. There's a lot of discussion about why. Simon Sinek has made that famous, saying that great leaders begin and end with why. But I think great people begin and end with who. Your life begins from a who. Your parents give you a name, and hopefully a name that you can live up to, and something that will indicate who you are. When our time on this planet is up, someone is going to define who we were by how we treated them and who we were while we lived. Our obituary, our eulogy, our final testament that shows up on our tomb or on an urn will say who we were. And who we are differs more often perhaps than it should. So for example, if you ask me, you just said, who am I? And I could define myself and then say, hey, I'm the world's greatest father. And then you'd say, well, what does your son believe? And I'd say, I believe my son thinks I'm the world's greatest father. And then I'd give you my son's phone number and you call him and he'd say, man, he's an absolute jerk. The answer about who I am is found in the answer that my son provided. He's the child, I'm the father. But you asked me who I was, and I described myself as the world's greatest father. And the only person who could define what kind of father I am would be the child. And so it is important for me to find a way, I believe we should all find a way to make who we are consistent across the board. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about who we are who we manifest or project ourselves to be to the world, because the world at some point will write who we were, and what they write will be all there is to us when our time is up. So who am I? I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who hopes to leave the planet better than it was when I arrived. I'm a guy who was named Nathaniel A. Turner because my mother wanted to give me a good Christian name, which Nathaniel is Hebrew meaning gift of God. And my father's favorite historical figure, or one of his two favorite, Malcolm X was one, the other was Nat Turner. He wanted to name me after one of those two people. My mother in 1965 was having no parts of naming her son Malcolm, which you could probably understand why. But my father was able to slip in Nat. So I became affectionately named after Nat Turner. So that's who I am. I'm a child who is expected to be a gift of God to people, but also a child who is expected to challenge people and be somewhat of a revolutionary about the things in the way that I look at life. And thus I'm on your program disrupt the everyday. So that seems only fitting that Nat Turner, who disrupted stuff, would appear on the show. That's who I am.
Sounds good. Now, you mentioned your son there. Can we talk about your son a bit, and basically where he is now, and then throughout the conversation, I'm sure we'll talk about some of the things that you learned as a parent, and
Sure.
and what led to him being where he is today. But yeah, let's give you a chance to brag on Nathaniel Jr.
No. So my son's name is Naeem, and I won't brag. I'll just say this, and I don't tell people all the time. I'm not even. People say, "Aren't you proud?" I say, "No, absolutely not. I'm grateful. I don't have any reason to be proud. I mean, pride is kind of an emotion that I try to stay away from. I'm grateful. I'm humbled that that the Creator gave me the opportunity to be the father of this particular life. It didn't have to be, and I am, and I'm grateful. And I'm also grateful that when you give a child some direction and some insight, and you introduce a child to people who you think can be influential and positive in their life, that child then takes advantage of those opportunities. Not all children do that. So I'm humbled and I'm grateful to be my son's father.
I like that viewpoint of, grateful instead of proud, right? You always see like proud parent, proud moment, all that kind of stuff. But it really, when you sit back and break it down, it really is that you are grateful as the parent, whether your child is a baby up to 27, to see how they continue to move on in life and flourish and have success, and even the struggles that they deal with but overcome, right?
Absolutely.
Grateful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that.
And when they don't do well, what emotion do we then say? Because what's the opposite of pride? Embarrassed, detest. Like I don't have any of those things. So I'm grateful that when he does well, he gets all the credit. And when he does poorly, I accept all the blame. Because I see myself as my son's the tree, and he's the fruit. And I've never seen a person be mad at the fruit. If you wanted an apple and you end up with a pear, you don't get mad at the fruit. You ask yourself, where did you get this piece of fruit from? Oh, off of that tree. Well, that's the wrong tree. So I see myself as that I'm the tree, and it's my responsibility to make sure that I bear good fruit, and the good fruit so far has been him.
So I'm just going to go, I guess we would say, out in right field or left field for a second. Left field.
Wherever you want to go.
and jump to like the teenage years and young adults. Like our oldest is a 13-year-old. So we're just getting there. But when you have a child who is now coming into their own, and they do, as we would say in society, start going down a wrong path. However that is, we see this all the time where they can have been raised in a home, whether you have two parents, whether religion plays an impact, just all these things. But when it comes to their time, they start going down that road. And you see a lot of times, like parents, obviously they take that on and, almost feel as though they're a failure to their child, even though they provided them everything, every opportunity they potentially could. And, using that analogy of the tree and the fruit, what would you say to a parent right now who's dealing with that?
Well, so I'll tell you a little bit what I'd say. I know it's probably unfair to a parent who's at that point now, but I will say that in this country, and I would imagine in most countries, we do parents a great disservice. So if a parent finds themselves challenged with a teenager, my question would be, well, what kinds of things were you doing at the formative years? I don't think children just wake up one day and decide that now I'm 13, I'm going to take this course that's way to your early left or right field. I think the child could still walk the straight and narrow path that you wanted them to walk. But the question I would have is, well, what did you do from 0 to 7? Because all of the science indicates that the greatest growth in a child happens from ages 0 to 7. In fact, Aristotle famously said, bring me a child by 7, I'll show you the man. Today, we wouldn't use man because we may not even use woman, but we would use something like bring me a child at 7, I'll show you the adult. The question I would ask parents is, who do you want your child to be when your child is, 18? Because whatever that goal is, then that goal has to begin at 0. And too often we don't. And so we end up outsourcing our children. And while they're ours, they certainly are our children. They spend more time with other people than they spend with us. I'm not sure about the Canadian school system, but here in America, by and large, most states have a requirement that the only compensatory relationship that a child has, obligatory relationship, a legal relationship that a child has, is with a school from age 6 to 16. The schools are the only ones responsible for educating them, for feeding them if necessary. Parents are not obligated to do that. They can give their children up for adoption. They can put their children in foster homes, but those kids still have to go to school. Churches or religious institutions are no obligation to do that. So I think part of the problem is parents don't have any direction, and no one ever asked us at the very beginning, well, what is it that we want for a child when the child is 13? We all know it's coming. We've all heard these stories about when the child gets a certain age. But the question is, well, what plans do we make in preparation for that? If you were driving somewhere and someone said you're going to be driving on rough terrain, you'd probably have a different kind of tire on your car. But when we're parents and we're told there's going to be rough terrain, what are we doing in preparation for that?
Okay. So you talk about the life template. Is this where that all comes in?
Absolutely. So the life template began for us as an accident. I was 1993. I was in my in a dual degree program for my master's and my law degree. It was a 5-year program. So I think I was in year 4 or starting year 4. My wife decided that her biological clock was ticking. I reminded her that her clock was digital and you couldn't hear ticking. She was having no parts of that. So we set out to have a child, and upon learning that because in 1994 she was expecting, the world was a little bit different. She was expecting. We asked ourselves, what is it that we would like to have been different in our own lives, and taking a real good self-analysis. And one of the things I wanted as a law student, I realized nobody was going to be looking for me after law school. In other words, no employers, no law firms were looking for me. Had I gone to a different law school, had I been at Harvard or Yale or some very prestigious law school, folks would have looked for me regardless of the grades I made because of the prestige of the university. So one of the first things we thought was, well, what if we can at least do that for our child? Neither one of us have attended any great institution. So what's the best school in the United States? At the time it was Harvard. So we wrote Harvard and used Harvard's application. We just thought we were going to do that to help prepare a child academically. What we found in the application, and found it applications of many schools since, is that most schools obviously want students to have great academic background, but they also want students, at least Harvard did in 1994, students who were world citizens and students who, as they said, cared for something greater than themselves. And that became the 3 elements of the template. Today we call it intellectual ambition. We don't just worry about grades and test scores. We want to help children understand about being Socratic thinkers and also about how to think critically. The second element about being a world citizen, we now see that as global and cultural competency. So being able to do more than just maybe speak an additional language or two, but having a real understanding and a sense of passion and compassion for other people from other walks of life. And then the last thing is to raise someone who cares deeply about humanity and wants to do something that makes the planet better while they're here and before they're gone. And that's the part of the life template.
Okay.
So it sounds like this was kind of maybe like the first thing that you did when you realized that you were going to be a father. You took this a lot more seriously. And so this is where is that where the template came from?
Yeah. Before, because I had a challenging relationship, let's just say, with my father. When my wife, part of my reservation about being a parent was that I assumed that I was going to mess it up. When you haven't seen better, and people always say, what they see is what they be. Well, I hadn't seen better. And what I was afraid of is that I was going to be my father. My father was his father. I imagine his father was his father. My uncles were my grandfather. I imagine my grandfather was his father. And I didn't want to be any of those things. So I started taking notes about what it was that I wanted to happen. And then upon writing Harvard, like I said, it was a little bit of luck. We wrote Harvard, and once we got that application, when one says, okay, well, I don't have a child yet, but I want my child to be able to meet the qualifications of Harvard. Well, what do I need to do? And so academically, you say, well, I need to make sure the child can read as soon as possible. I need to make sure the child can do math as soon as possible. So you do some research and you find out, well, who's doing that kind of work? And we came across a gentleman by the name of Glenn Doman, who was doing work with children with brain injuries and was teaching children to read by 18 months and teaching children to do sophisticated math problems by 18 months. And I said, hold on a second. My child doesn't have a brain injury. So if they can do this with children with brain injuries, well, what am I waiting on? And so we took the things that Mr. Doman had done and some others and just applied that to our unborn child and to our child when he was delivered. We just did those things. The results were phenomenal. That by the time he was 2 months, he spoke his first words. I remember sharing that with my mother, and she said, well, it just sounded like he said words. And then I said, well, it just sounded like you said words.
Wow.
So by 10 months, 10 and a half months, he was speaking in full sentences. And I don't mean like mommy, car. I mean, Dad, I want dinner. By the time he was 2, I remember he said this sentence to me because I'd asked him to go take a nap. He said, Dad, you are rude and foolish. You ought to be ashamed of yourself and you owe me an apology. And he walks up the stairs and gets to the landing. And I look up at the stairs and I think, do I go grab him and throw him off this landing? Or do I bow down? Like, who says this? But, our friends thought he would say stuff like, he's a genius. And I would remind them, when you all would come to our home and you would walk in his bedroom, you'd hear language tapes being played. There was no nursery rhymes. There was, hola, ¿cómo está? Bien tú? There was the German tapes that were being played. Guten Morgen, Guten Tarde. So we were doing, there were big pictures that we would hold up that might have, for example, a fire engine. And we would say, everything we could think of about a fire engine. It's red, R-E-D. Fire engines make this incredible sound, right? Fire engines have a ladder on it, ladder, L-A-D-D-E-R. And these are the things that we had read about helping a child in terms of the learning and cognitive development. Well, it worked. To our surprise, the science, imagine that the science worked. And that, so at 1, we bought him his first computer. And so we just continued to do, at 2, he was tested for his vocabulary. It exceeded that of an 8-year-old. The lady just stopped the test. She got to like 5-year-old stuff and he wouldn't answer her questions. And I said, well, he's probably not challenged. And then she started, what's this? He said, pantry. What's that? Space shuttle. And she was like, oh my God. And I can't give him credit for stuff at his age, but he's well above his age level. So, but it was nothing that we did that was miraculous. It was just simply following some tools that were available to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, establishing the blueprint and then following it. But yeah, that's
okay.
So I'm curious.
I'm sorry if that answer was too long.
No, that's good.
That's
I'm in awe.
Don't worry about that. I should always say this to people before we start talking. But listen, we want to hear what you know, so don't worry about being too long at all.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
No, another thing I'm curious about. You mentioned the language tapes and everything that he was listening to. How many languages does he speak today?
Well, it depends on if he tells you the story. I tell you the story. I say he's fluent in 4. And he would say, I don't know, I'm a little rusty on it. Maybe you could say 3. But at the time, before he left the U.S. as a 16-year-old, he went to Brazil. He spoke Spanish, English, Catalan, which is obviously a version of Spanish is spoken, I think, in the northern region of Spain. I could be mistaken. I know it's spoken in Barcelona. And he spoke Portuguese. When he returned from Brazil for one of his first stints, he had a tryout in Germany, and he taught himself German. And I think while he was attended an international school for a bit and also picked up a bit of French. So at one point or another, there were at least 6 languages that he could have some level of conversation in.
Awesome. Now
his parents speak one, and I don't know, based upon today's conversation, you might say you don't do that one very well either, but that's it.
Oh man.
Well, the question that's going to be raised there, I did some reading to prepare, so I know a little bit of this, but so he left the U.S. at 16.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Pray tell, why did he leave?
Yeah. So again, the objective was, of course, to help him to meet the academic requirements of Harvard. So he was moving ahead quite well. Started high school as a 7th grader. By the time he was into his end of his first semester of his junior year in high school, we had taken a trip to the Grand Canyon. And while we were there, I had finished reading the book, The Alchemist, and also The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. And I'd shared The Alchemist with him, and he read it. And so he and I were standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and my wife is behind us with yelling and screaming to tell us to get off of the edge. And I'm bragging about how great it is to be on the edge. And he's like, yeah, it is great. And I said, don't you feel alive? And he says, yeah, I do. And I said, you should feel this way every day. He said, absolutely. And that's why I'm not going back to high school next year. And I was like, huh? He said, you told me to dream, and I've read The Alchemist, and it's time for me, Dad, to chase my pyramid. And I want to go. I want to lead a country. I want to play professional soccer, and it's not going to happen if I stay here. So I used the 4-hour work week. And the ideal about hiring a virtual assistant, and I hired a virtual assistant. His name is Nathan. And Nathan shopped Naeem's soccer background to clubs across the globe and found 11 clubs across the world who were interested in having him come in for tryouts. Clubs that were in France and England and I think Germany, Bangkok, Thailand might have been the furthest place away, and then Brazil. And so we went to Brazil in June of 2012. He had some tryouts, played in a way we had never seen him play with more joy than I've ever seen him play. And he said, I want to stay. So he stayed.
Wow.
Yep. And because he had already met all of the requirements for high school, he had even earned 33 college credits in the process. He was able to go, and he knew, and so he didn't know Portuguese, but in preparation for going to Brazil, he would use Rosetta Stone. Well, he did, because as I mentioned, I barely speak English well, and he taught himself Spanish. He taught himself Portuguese.
Wow.
Well, if I remember correctly, that's The Alchemist is Paulo Coelho, so he probably went and read it in Portuguese to help him learn it as well.
He read it in English, which is interesting, right? Because Paulo Coelho is Brazilian, so that was a kind of a cool thing that I won't say full circle, but an interesting connection that the book that got you out of the country to go to Brazil was written by a Brazilian author.
Brazilian. Wow. Yep. I have so many questions. I guess what I'm gonna start with is, okay, we have 4 kids. So I'm listening to you, and like the time that you and your wife put into your son. And I mean, like, Brian and I have sort of set our lives up at this point where we work, yes, but our schedules really work for our family, right? So my question to you is, maybe, and you might not be able to speak on it because you only have one child, but for people who have multiple children, how can you make this work and invest in all your children, right? Because we all know they all have different gifts. They're talented at so many different things, but I would love to hear any thoughts you have around that for parents with multiple children.
Sure. I believe the one of the key elements, I won't say the key element, but one of the key elements is to ask, where do you want to go in the end? I think if you and I'm outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, but if I wanted to come visit you all, you would tell me how to get there, or you'd give me your address, and I would ask, I won't say it out loud, Google, because it's probably listening to me now. How do I get there? And it would give me directions. The GPS would tell me how to get to wherever you are. But as parents, rarely do we ever ask ourselves, where is it that we want our children to get in the end? And, tragic things happen all the time. And then someone else tells the story about who our children were. But they won't be able to tell that story if we've defined for ourselves who it is that we want our children to be. So I would say to any parent, I don't care how many children you have, I'd say for each child you have, what are your most audacious hopes and dreams for those children? And then once you decide that, then let's figure out how to backward design that. If you say, Naim said, I want to play professional soccer, and I say, I don't know anything about soccer. I can't kick a ball. Again, I barely could spell the word. So how do you become a professional soccer player? Well, let's take a look at how other people have become professional soccer players and what are they doing on a daily basis. Then are you doing those things on a daily basis? And what are they eating? Because once we have a plan, then it feels less daunting than it does. Like most parents are like, well, how do I do? I've got so many things to do. Yeah, I know, because you have a plan. You go to work every day and you have a job description, which is sort of a plan about what you're supposed to do. In the job description, your employer tells you, here's what you need to do to get a promotion. And they have a series of things you need to do. But when it comes to being parents or being married couples, as an example, we don't ever have a plan on how to love your children, to love your spouse, to get your children to the direction you want them to get to. And then one day we wake up and our kids are 16, 17, or 18, and we're like, okay, well, what do I do now? So I'd say start with what are the most audacious hopes and dreams you have for your children, and then work backward.
Okay. So what do you say to the parents who think more of, well, our children will let us know what their hopes and dreams are? Because they're out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I would laugh. So the reason I laugh is because when a child is born, a child has no idea of what is possible for them. The objective for the person that is sharing the journey with them, which is the parents are the guide, is to imagine if you and I went on a tour, and let's say we went, I don't know, to Egypt. The best trip we could have in Egypt would not be one where we just tried to figure out where we were on our own. The best trip of Egypt would be to find someone who could give us who was the guide, who could show us all the relics and landmarks and all the historical things we wanted to see and the best places to eat and all that stuff. But again, when we think about parenting, we say, well, the child will lead us. No, the child won't lead you. That's ridiculous. You are the tree, they're the fruit. You are the part responsible. So I do understand that children will develop a passion or interest in certain things, but sometimes they only develop a passion and interest in certain things because they've only seen so few things. I think the best thing parents could do is give children what I consider like the buffet table to broaden the horizons so they see all kinds of stuff. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. I would equate my childhood to being on the end of the buffet table where there was only hot dogs, potato chips, and cheese and crackers. No, seriously. And some kids grow up where there's filet mignon and Dom Perignon and caviar at their buffet table. There are other stuff on the table. They're not even remotely interested in going down to the other end of the table. I think the goal is to give your child perspective of everything that's on the buffet table as much as possible. And then you can figure it out. Like Naim's saying to us, he wanted to leave high school and move to Brazil. There's nothing you could have told me when he was born and we were reading on those big cards and, telling what colors and the fire engine and the lion, all this stuff, that this child was one day going to say to me, hey, I need to go to Brazil and play soccer. Like, there's nothing in my mind. My mind was, okay, well, how do I get you to meet the academic qualifications of Harvard? And you've told me now as a 16-year-old, that you don't even want to go to college. Right? I don't even want to finish high school. So, but because of the buffet table, right? You understood the languages, so you could go. You were intellectually prepared. You were socially prepared. So when you got a chance to go, you went and you performed at your highest possible ability. You fit in. You learn a lot about yourself. So it was a great experience, even though your dream of playing professional soccer didn't happen because you had a concussion. You were still set up to move on to the next thing. There was not just the one thing. So I don't know if that's a long answer to a short question, but yeah, the objective of parenting should be to give our children, right, the widest variety of options to see, because they won't have any idea what they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yep.
Now, I'm curious. Did any of your family kind of follow some of the same approaches that you and your wife chose to follow? Because it seems like, I know there's another athlete in your family as well. So, so I'm guessing maybe some of this rubbed off on some of your family.
In the very beginning, most of my family thought we were crazy.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. They probably still do think I'm crazy, but most of my family thought it was crazy. So, for example, had we known you, I've got this really good feeling about you all that you would have received this letter from us, and there was a letter saying, hey, we're expecting to have this child. We don't know if it's male or female, but here's what we decided to do. We've picked 10 names, 10 male and 10 female names. We're not going to name this baby until the 8th day. We're going to follow this ancient African tradition. We want you to come over once the baby is home, spend some time with the baby. We want you to vote with everybody else what you think the name of the child should be. We want you to be a part of the naming of the child, because we believe that if you are a part of the naming, you will be a part of the village that makes sure that child lives up to the name that we give. And we said, oh, by the way, we're also going to throw away my last name. We're not going to use that anymore. And we're going to give the child a completely different last name. So the baby leaves the hospital with no name. Birth certificate says Baby Boy Turner. People that keep asking day 1, day 2, day 3, what's the baby's name? Baby got no name. Baby gets no name until day 8. So you come to the house and there's language tapes being played in the crib. You won't allow people to call the baby a baby. You tell everybody the baby is an MIT. You're a man in training. You won't ever let anyone call him a baby. You always say he's our man in training. So yes, my family thought we were completely out of it. That's why my mother, when I said, hey, my child spoke and it's 2 months, she says, no, it sounded like words. And then, then it sounds like you said words. So yes, most folks thought we were absolutely crazy. And it probably wasn't until 9 was, 5 or so. Well, he started at a school at 3. So probably around 4 when folks would say, he's different. Mm-hmm. And then folks now, of course, it's a whole different story.
Of course.
But before, no, most people thought they thought we were crazy. Along the way, some of our friends and family would see some of the things that we were doing. So one of the things I would do, I'm big on visualizing. And so I asked a 4-year-old when he was learning to play soccer to start visualizing. We took him to the soccer field. This is the sports piece you were asking about. We took him to the soccer field. He says, we signed him up for soccer. I'm going to be the worst person here. And I said, yes, you are. So let's get that out the way. You are the worst, right? So the good thing is when you're at the bottom, there's no place to go but up. I said, but you don't have to always be at the bottom. We're going to work on your game. You're going to get better. And so it was like an 8-game season. And around game 7, something dawned on me and said, hey, do you ever visualize? And of course, he doesn't. What is visualization? And I said, well, son, it's when you imagine what you want to happen. I said, just try. Just close your eyes. Just imagine what you want to happen. And he tells me, I'm going to steal the ball from somebody, and I'm going to race down the field, and I'm going to kick the ball with I said, which foot, your right or your left? My right, and I'm going to score a goal. And would you know it, he went on the field that day and did that very thing. So that the next day, when we were driving home, he's like, oh my God, like, okay, when do we play again? I said, well, don't play the next week. So next week, I'm looking in the back seat. His eyes are closed. and he's visualized. So I said, what do you see? And he says, he scores 2 goals. And what do you know? He goes out and scores 2 goals. So now he's in love with the game. But he's in love with the game because, in part, what he's learned as a life lesson is that what you see in your mind's eye, what you believe, can happen. So I started putting things on his wall, pictures, words. He also ran track. So it was 2 signs, big posters I had on his wall. It says, what did you do today to get to the London Olympics? This was for 2012. And the other side said, what did you do today to get to La Liga? Because that was the league he wanted to play for. My nephew, his father and I had a conversation. So we made a sign for him that said, what did you do today to get to the NBA? And so Naeem left the country and moved to Brazil to chase his dream. So that kind of fit. He was a 4-time track and field All-American as a youth sprinter, finished 2nd in the nation once and a 5th in a world meet once. And my nephew plays for the Orlando Magic. So they both had these signs. They're the only people in the family who had these signs that went on the wall that said, what did you do today? So Gary's still playing. And Naeem, while he's not playing soccer, still transitions some of those same tools and strategies to the academic rigors.
Yeah. I totally agree with that vision, right? Whether it be, the vision board, just thinking and doing, and so many, even kids, adults, even, we have these grandiose goals, but no step by step on how we're gonna get there, right? Or you speak to all these kids who want to go to the NBA or want to play in the major leagues, all this stuff. But it's true. And as a parent, some parents may laugh and be like, okay, yeah, that's great. You ask them what they want to do when they grow up. I want to be a basketball player. Okay, well, what do you really want to do? Hey, all the power to you, but you do have to put that work in.
Absolutely.
And it's that work ethic that whether you do soccer your whole career or you have to branch off and do something else, that work ethic continues wherever it is that you go. Right?
Yep. And we've tried to show families, for an example, once Naeem, so in 2012, he left. He was in Brazil, had a professional tryout in Germany, went back to Brazil, and was in Brazil till, I want to say, October of 2013. So he was there about 15, 16 months, and he had a concussion, and I won't bother with that story. But anyway, he ends up coming home. He decides to, okay, now I'm ready to go to college. But the unique thing, remember the template was to be intellectually ambitious, right? To be prepared academically, to be global and culturally competent. So part of his journey was this global and cultural competency. Not only learn the language, but then he went and lived in a country amongst people who that was their native tongue. Then there's the humanitarian drive part. He says, I know exactly what I want to do with my life now. And I was like, okay. So it's not you're now have pivoted, which is cool because that's the buffet table. So now you pivot. So yeah, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to be an engineer. And again, there's nothing you could have ever told me that this baby I was playing with was going to be an engineer. Argues all the time. Lawyer, maybe like his dad, potentially, right? Engineer, didn't see it happening at all. But that's what he says, is I know exactly what I want to do. And not only do I know that I want to be an engineer, I know exactly what I want to do with engineering. I want to use technology to enhance the lives of people who've been historically and geographically underserved and underrepresented. Those are his words. I'm like, okay, all right. So now we got to apply to some schools, but because we've done this great job academically, we're not really worried about that. So he applies to 31 of America's top engineering schools. He gets admitted to 27 of them. He has more scholarship money offered to him than most high schools graduating classes get. I think it was we did the math, about $10.8 million in scholarship, grants, financial aid available to him. He visits a number of schools. He chooses the school that makes him feel like he matters the most. And in 4 years, he finishes a bachelor's in electrical engineering, I think with a minor in computer science and computer engineering. He applies to 7 PhD. He gets admitted to 7 PhD programs, direct admission. So they're not requiring him to get a master's first. And he's at Carnegie Mellon. So it's his fifth year. But those same strategies that we took as an athlete to get him to Brazil were the same things we took when it came to be a student. Hey, every day you got to affirm who you are. So let's get this thing out. When he was running track, we called it the brain, and he would take notes about what he expected to do in that for that track meet. Not about the times, but how he planned to start and how he planned to use his arms and how he planned to pump his, like only the process, never the outcomes, because we don't have any control of the outcome. But as a student, we realized he needed the same thing. So there was a system. There were 20 things he would do every day. Every single day he would do. If you're an athlete, coaches tell you to hydrate and to stretch, right? And to think positive thoughts and, watch game film and, study your opponent. Well, when you're a student, what instructions do you have? The students don't have any instructions. So we figured we need to give him a system because systems would always work well for him. At the end of each week, he had to do 7 things. Amongst those were spending time with professors, and he had to ask professors, he had to get to know them. Whether or not he had a question, whether or not there was a test, it didn't matter. You have to get to know these people. You have to get to understand their humanity, because at some point in time, you might need something from them and you're going to want them to recognize your full humanity. And if you haven't extended yourself, life is reciprocal. If you haven't extended yourself, you have no right to expect anyone to do that for you. And then at the beginning of every quarter or semester, we would create a new vision board. And so he would, put on this board all the things that he hoped to accomplish in his life and some of the things he hoped to accomplish during the semester. Some of the things he accomplished after the semester or quarter would come off, and he put new things on the vision board, but there was always a vision board. And we did that, every year for those 4 years while I was an undergrad. And he carried it over a little bit into graduate school, but not with the same detail.
It's interesting now because, a lot of what you were talking about there was really having that end goal, having that vision, working backwards from that, breaking down the steps, which I know you mentioned Timothy Ferriss earlier. Some of his writings, Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. But I know, well, Tim Ferriss for sure hadn't written any books when when your son was at the age where you were going through all this with him. So where did the inspiration come to kind of develop systems, vision board, visualizing? Where did you learn all that?
Honestly, it will sound hokey. It just came from the love of a child and wanting to be better than my father was. I mean, honestly, that is it. And the funny thing is, my father passed in 2018. And so I spent an inordinate amount of time and energy wanting to be better than my father. So what I was doing was only seeing most of the negative stuff and not taking a minute to say, you know what? He's your tree. There's some good stuff in you.
Right.
It had to come from somewhere. Let's focus on some of those good things you got. And in fact, one of the best things he ever said to me was, if there's something I did that works for you, keep it. And if there are things that I did that don't, throw them out. And I used to think, like, dude, that is the most cowardly thing in the world to say. Why don't you just be better? And then when I thought about it, I was like, well, no,
it's true.
No, there's some value to that. So, but yeah, the all of the stuff comes from loving a child. And the irony of it is that I wasn't doing any of it for myself. And it took that same child to tell me one day that I needed to do more, which was like, what did you say to me? They said, Dad, you need to do more. I'm like, okay, but what? He says, well, you always telling me about dreaming. It's now time for you to realize some of your dreams. And I said, I don't have any dreams, which again I don't think that's an uncommon experience. I think most parents, most adults stop dreaming. We stopped dreaming long ago, certainly about big, audacious dreams. We're too busy saying, well, that's impossible, right? That doesn't make any sense. Like you're too old to do that, or I'm too old to do that. Well, this 16-year-old child, as he was getting ready to go to Brazil, and we were sitting in the car, and I've got eyes welled up full of tears, and he's looking at me like, what is wrong with you? It's like, well, you getting ready to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. He said, well, do for everybody else what you've always done for me. And I was like, well, what in God's name is that? What have I done? Like, I have no clue. He said, Dad, I'm getting ready to go to Brazil. Like, I'm prepared. How did you think I got here? And he said, so what are your dreams? And I'm like, dude, I don't have any dreams. People talk about bucket list and we remake bucket lists. I guess that's kind of a thing. So it's a place to start. And I think the other part of it, to answer your question, is I had a friend who passed at age 40. The speculation is that it may have been suicide. And when I remember going to his funeral and seeing on his tomb the words poet and author, and I just thought to myself, well, who knew that? I know he dabbled in some spoken word, but are you a poet if no one knows you're a poet? It's like it's a tree in the forest. Did it fall if we didn't hear it? And I sort of said, I don't want to live my life like that. I don't want someone else to define me as something that nobody else knew me as being. And so that's helped me move forward. I don't know how much of that has to do with Naeem, because by then Naeem this was 2008. He was already 13, but it did help me to sort of move my own life forward.
Mm-hmm. And sorry.
So I was going to say, is that why, we can say that you're a multiple time author and, you've done the TED Talk and all that? Was that kind of the impetus for it? Yeah.
The child who told me to do more. And then the very good friend of mine he and I shared the same birthday. We were part of the same fraternity. I had known him for more than 20 years. He was in my wedding. He was there when my son was born. I mean, he was an integral part of my life. And suddenly he was no more. And it made me reflect, greatly on, just how fragile life is and how finite and how, Les Brown has a great saying that says, gone today, here today, gone today. This is, some people say here today, gone tomorrow. He just says here today, gone today. And it makes you think like you could be here today and gone today. And if today is my last day, what is it that I want to be doing? And if I get it tomorrow, what am I doing today to build upon what it is that I hopefully will do tomorrow? And so, yeah, that's why I write now. And that's why I, speak as often as I can, in as many places as I can. And the work that we're doing is because of that.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say, I appreciate that, right? Because there's so many parents that when they're in those young years, it's like, it's all their children. And then, you are left thinking like, oh man, I'm just working like a 9 to 5. You're just on that hamster wheel. Right. But I'm a strong believer that you can parent and you can provide your children, with these opportunities to do extracurricular sports, all that kind of stuff, but also give yourself a chance to grow, however that is, right? Going back to school, taking courses, living those or creating those audacious dreams. So I think it's something that we don't always have to wait till our kids are gone to start doing for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have a partnership, so it's an interesting thing. If you've been around in the very beginning and saying, okay, he's reading these books about how to teach a child to read, and he's reading these books about how to teach a child to do math as soon as possible. When the child starts to read, you're like, okay, well, that's great. In order to go to Harvard, you're going to need your vocabulary is going to need to be exceptional, because you're going to take these standardized tests that are going to ask you questions that people are going to say are racially biased or socially biased. And it's primarily because you haven't been exposed to certain words in certain circumstances. So, okay, well, how do I expose this child to certain words that I don't even know? You know what I need to do? You need to up your vocabulary. So now I got to read, and I would write my son letters. And this is one of the things I did, that I could write him and say, I don't know, I could write him and say daily, or I could write him and say every day. Right. And so in one sentence, it might say daily. In the next sentence, it might say every day. So now he knows that the two things are not the same. Or I could write him and say, this is hard, or I could say, this is arduous. Right. I could say, you're treating me unkind, or I could say, you're treating me, our relationship is going to be tumultuous. So I had to raise my vocabulary. And so now I'm speaking to this child, and now the child starts to understand this vocabulary. So his vocabulary is raised. So it becomes this partnership. I'm going to do better as the tree so that the fruit can be sweeter. But if I don't do better as the tree, there's little chance that the fruit is going to be sweeter, unless the fruit has this exceptional ecosystem that the other people around, the other villagers around, can pour into the child more than I can. But my experience is that I'm my son's biggest model, and if I don't model the behavior, then it's unlikely that he's going to model the behavior. I lost 35, 40 pounds because I didn't want to be the father on the soccer field yelling and screaming at my son about running faster and working harder, and I was out of shape. I was like, I can't run up and down this field. I'm yelling at these 6-year-old kids about run faster. Like, this is ridiculous. So before his 5th birthday, it was December 31st, 1999. I promised him that I was going to get in the best shape I'd ever been in. And by my birthday, July 15th, I had scheduled myself and to participate in a bodybuilding contest. I'd gotten down from 211 pounds to 178 pounds on the day of the competition, and was less than 10% body fat. And when I would take him to school, his classmates would suddenly call me the muscle daddy because I looked different than the other fathers. And I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Now I'm not a hypocrite anymore because I'm not yelling and screaming about telling my son to do something that I can't do. And when he ran track, I was his training partner until he was 10. And then I was like, dude, I'm over it. I can't. This is it, man. I'm 40 now. I'm not running 400-meter runs under a minute. I just can't. I'm not doing it. This is ridiculous. So I'll run with you for 100 meters. Yes. 50, got you. 200, maybe. But this other stuff, I'm over it. But yeah, I've maintained that, stayed in shape because I made him a commitment. That's the partnership we've had.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much, even I'm just looking at the time, but so much we haven't talked about, but so many great things that we've covered already. Anything else?
Well, I'm just curious. I always want to ask this when I have the opportunity to speak to someone who's done a TED Talk. What is it like doing a TED Talk?
So the TED Talk was one of the things on the list. Right. And I shouldn't say right. I hate when people say right, and here I just said it. So the TED Talk was something like, you're like, right. No, we don't know right. So the TED Talk was on my list of things to do. And the TED Talk was part of this idea of, one day, if you're going to have a voice, if you can do a TED Talk, maybe people will see it. I had a good friend of mine ask me if I was interested in doing a TEDx talk for his high school, not far from where I grew up. And I said, sure. So I had no idea what to do, really how to prepare. I wasn't smart enough then to see examples of what were the better TED Talks. So I prepared to the best of my ability, was quite nervous. And what made it worse, if you could give a TED Talk, if you can be in a place where you can actually see the faces of your audience, that's always helpful. I couldn't see anyone. So I was on a stage. The stage was probably 50 feet, 100 feet away from the audience, and it was dark. So I couldn't see the audience. They could see me. They only allowed 100 people in this room. The room probably seated 3,000 or 4,000 people. Oh, wow. So I couldn't hear any responses. So it was like talking to myself for 15 minutes. Wow. But then it was done. And like all things that we do is say, hey, I can't worry about the outcome. It was the process. It was something you said you wanted to do. You did it. You did it to the best of your ability on that day. And then that's the end of it. And I didn't think anything more about it until someone one day called me and said, hey, 15,000 people have watched your TED Talk. And I was like, wow, really? And then I didn't think about it again. And someone called me and said, there's 75,000 people. And I said, wow, I'm getting close to 100,000 people. And then someone called me and said, hey, there's 300,000 people who watched your TED Talk. And then that person who had ignored me, had poo-pooed me, I tried to offer to help her and her organization, says, oh, I'd like to have you on. And, so now I'm somebody. Now I'm somebody. So, yeah. So I don't know what the numbers are now. And I know it's well over 1 million. But so that's exciting. But I wish I could do it again. I probably would do it differently. But, it is what it is.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes, right?
Yeah.
You do it and you go back and you think of all the other things, but it's the opportunity. I always say, like, any opportunities you can get to try something different, I think it's great. Same thing we tell our kids.
Yeah, I usually say yes, and have adopted a little bit of the drug dealer mentality, which is to say, what makes drug dealers successful is that they always give people a taste. They give stuff away for free. And I guess some grocery stores, large grocery Sam's, we have Sam's here, and Costco's, where you walk in and people get to sample something, and okay, that's pretty good. And it's over here on this aisle, go buy it, right?
You're hooked.
I figured that's a little bit about how you have to be if you're a newcomer to the scene. You have to give people a taste, because there's everybody else that's serving them something. And it's the way to distinguish you from other people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it goes back to now you got me thinking about something else. Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote: "Every man is my superior in something," and you just showed how we can learn from a drug dealer. Right.
Don't do drugs, kids. That's not what we're saying that they have a very unique process for getting people to keep coming back. Yeah. Gotta have a good product. But you sometimes, when you're nobody, you have to start out by giving people stuff for free.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just for as well, anybody who's been a part of this conversation that wants to know more, I'm just going to share your website here. It's easy enough to remember, NathanielAturner.com.
Yep.
Also, I'll also point to your YouTube channel, Raising Supaman. That's Supaman. Also, if you're looking on IG or Twitter, it's at Superman's_dad. So we got all those. We'll make sure we share all of that in the links as well. Some might argue that you were Superman, especially those kids in his class when he was when you came in before that bodybuilding competition, right?
I was the muscle daddy. I was yes, I was the muscle daddy. I wasn't. He's affectionately Superman to me. We don't use the ER because we don't want to get sued, but he's Superman to me because as a child, again, one of the things that I would say to parents is, if you want your children to learn to read, let them read what they like. And so he enjoyed comic books. So one of those were Superman. And if you have 4 children, there are some consonants and vowels children have a harder time enunciating, and R's are one of those. So he would say Supaman. And I remember someone saying, well, he didn't say it right. And I said, yeah, but he can read. So are we focusing on the enunciation of an R? And I said, man, don't worry about it. You are my Superman. And so it just stuck. And I've been calling him Soup ever since. In fact, shoes, T-shirts, whatever would have soup on it. Like his shoes would say Superman is here or whatever. Everything I'd call him was Superman. So the project became the Raising Superman project. When he left for Brazil, folks wanted to know how he was doing. And I said, well, I'll just write a blog and I'll share with you how he's doing. And then it turned into something much more than I would have ever anticipated.
Oh, man, this is great. I mean, one of my favorite topics to discuss on this show is parenting. Like, I could sit and talk and learn. I think that's the biggest one, right? Like all day and just absorb, because like none of us have been there, done that, right? And the more we can learn, I think the better. And just reminding us that like we are our children's first teacher. We're that tree. What we produce is them, right? We have all the tools to provide them, and just for them to have the best experience in their life. So
yeah,
I appreciate that.
No worries. You got more tools than I had available to me, and certainly more tools than my parents had available to them. Yes. And I'll just say this, and I'll be quiet. I always find it's a little alarming, and it's also somewhat disconcerting when we think about what we do. And I include myself, that and my wife in the sort of the hubris of being a parent. We'll say there's no plan. We'll say, there's no manual. You'll say, there's no book. And then we'll still be a parent. Like, so what else? What else in the world would we do without any manual and instructions? No one will let you practice law, practice medicine, be a nurse, be an architect, design a building, nothing without having read a manual, taking a test, and continuing being educated on it. And yet we will create a life that will then go on to either enhance the lives of others or make the lives of others worse without any plan. And it's just, I'm like, that's just the kind of hubris humans have. And so rather than be completely like that, I say, well, hey, the very least I can do is to start creating a plan. And now you have a plan that you can share with other folks. And it's just another way. You don't have to use my plan. You can use your own. But what you can't say anymore is that there's no plan.
Right.
One does exist. No.
Well, awesome. Nate, thank you so much for taking the time today. We appreciate being able to learn some lessons from Superman's dad. And for everyone who listened or watched this podcast, thanks for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Appreciate you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.
Thank you.